Title: The 3 Trillion Firing, How One Mistake Saved Apple. Duration: 10 to 12 minutes, May 1985. Steve Jobs sits in an empty room at Apple headquarters. He's 30 years old. He's the co-founder of the company that changed the world of computers. But today, he's just been stripped of all power. Apple's board of directors, the people he himself brought into the company, have voted against him. They removed him from his position as head of the Macintosh division and sent him to an office he himself called Siberia. This wasn't just a demotion. This was betrayal. The company he created in his parents' garage had rejected him. And the worst part? It was his own mistake. But nobody in that moment could have guessed that this firing would become the best thing that could happen to Apple. It would trigger a chain reaction of events that, 12 years later, would transform a dying company into the most valuable corporation in human history. This is the story of a $3 trillion mistake. Let's go back a few years. In 1976, two friends, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, founded Apple in a garage. They were technology geniuses, but had absolutely no understanding of business. The company grew at a crazy pace. Apple released revolutionary products. But Jobs had a serious problem: his character. He was a brutal manager. He humiliated employees, burned bridges, created a toxic atmosphere. People hated him. The board decided he wasn't ready to be CEO. And then, in 1983, Jobs made a fatal mistake. He hired John Sculley, the CEO of PepsiCo. Jobs asked him, "Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or do you want to change the world with me?" Sculley came. And this was the beginning of the end. In 1985, Apple released two revolutionary products, Lisa and Macintosh. Technically, they were masterpieces. Lisa was the first computer with a graphical user interface, but they failed commercially. Lisa cost almost $10,000. People simply couldn't buy it. Macintosh was called a toy. Sales collapsed. Jobs and Sculley began a battle for control of the company. Jobs wanted to make Apple a leader in personal computers. Sculley thought it was a failure. In May 1985, the board made their choice. They supported Sculley. Jobs was removed from managing Macintosh and given the empty position of Director of New Product Development. A few months later, 30-year-old Steve Jobs submitted his resignation and left the company he had created. Later, Jobs would confess, "I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt like I had let down the previous generation of entrepreneurs, that I had dropped the baton." This was deep depression, the lowest point of his life. But it was in this darkness that Jobs made the most important discovery of his life. He didn't give up. He founded a new company, Next. These were supposed to be computers for universities and researchers. Jobs invested $12 million of his own money. In 1988, Next released its first computer. It was beautiful, powerful, revolutionary, but it failed commercially. Too expensive, too complicated. In 1993, Next stopped selling computers and switched to software development. But there was another project. In 1986, Jobs bought a small computer graphics studio from George Lucas for $5 million. It was called Pixar. And then a miracle happened. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the first full-length computer animated film in history. The film grossed $373 million at the box office. Pixar went public. Shares that were planned to be sold for $12 to $14 closed on the first day of trading at $39, a 175% increase. Steve Jobs became a billionaire. But most importantly, during these 12 years, Jobs changed as a person. He learned to delegate. He learned to listen to others. He worked on relationships with his daughter, whom he had previously rejected. He became a better person and a better leader. Meanwhile, Apple was dying. Without Jobs, the company lost its vision. In 1993, Apple's profit fell by 84%. CEO John Sculley resigned. By 1997, Apple's market capitalization had fallen by 80%. The company was losing over $1 billion a year. Investors lost hope. Employees were fleeing. Apple was on the verge of bankruptcy. Apple's new CEO, Gil Amelio, understood they needed a new operating system to compete with Windows. The old Mac OS was hopelessly outdated. And then he remembered Next. On December 20th, 1996, Apple announced the acquisition of Next for $427 million in cash and stock. The main goal was to get the revolutionary Next Step operating system. But there was another condition in the contract. Steve Jobs was returning to Apple as a consultant. A few months later, in 1997, Emilio was fired, and Jobs became interim CEO. The first thing he did? He called a meeting and said, "You know what's wrong with this company? The products suck. They have no soul." Jobs began a revolution inside Apple. He cut the product line from 350 items to 10. He killed Newton, a project that was sucking up $100 million. And he created the iMac, a futuristic computer in a transparent colored case. In 1998, for the first time since 1995, Apple returned to profitability. Profit amounted to $309 million. But this was only the beginning. Over the next years, Jobs released products that changed the industry. iPod in 2001, which killed the CD industry. iPhone in 2007, which changed the concept of the phone forever. iPad in 2010, which created a new category of devices. By 2011, when Jobs passed away, Apple had become the most valuable company in the world. Today, its capitalization exceeds $3 trillion. If you had invested $1,000 in Apple in 1997, when Jobs returned, today you would have over $1.3 million. So what happened? Getting fired from Apple wasn't a disaster. It was the most valuable lesson in Jobs' life. He lost control, and it taught him to control himself. He failed Next as a commercial product, but it gave Apple the operating system that saved the company. He invested in Pixar without knowing what it would bring, but it made him a billionaire and taught him to be a better manager. When Jobs returned to Apple, he wasn't the same ambitious guy who only wanted control. He became a leader who knew how to inspire, how to listen, how to create products that change the lives of billions of people. Getting fired from Apple wasn't a mistake. It was an investment in himself. An investment that returned with a profit of $3 trillion.